An incredible way to create tension in your music is by combining any bass note with any chord note. So today we're going to go over how that sounds, how that works, and we'll finish by writing a song together. Any bass and any chord can go together, but in two different ways. The first is if we were to combine one chord with different bass notes. Let me demonstrate. Now this has a powerful sound, but it feels like it's never quite resolved. It has a lot of energy, but it never feels quite there yet. Now I like that definition, and we're going to use that definition to write music with. Now the second way is where we reverse it, and we play one bass note with different chords on top of it. I think this feels kind of melancholy, you know? There's this tension there, this fogginess, like the emotion is covered by a blanket. It's very complex, it's beautiful, it's vague, it's atmospheric, it's dissonant. It's perfect for songwriting. Now these two techniques feel and sound completely different. But before we talk about how to use that, and before we start writing our song of our own, first we need to understand why they feel different. The underlying principle is called relative motion. It's the idea that when notes physically move, they also move relative to each other, which means if one of them moves, they all change. Let me demonstrate. Let's say I play two A notes, and I move the bass down one note. The distance between these two notes has now increased by 1. So even though the bass moved down, from its point of view, the top note relatively moved up. So this top note is no longer the first note, but the second. Let's move the bass down another note. The distance increases, the bass physically moved down, so the top note relatively moves up, and this note is no longer the second note, but the third note. And I can keep doing this, moving the bass down one note. Now we're playing a fifth, minor sixth, major sixth, minor seventh, major seventh, and we're back at 1. Now this is usually very intuitive, but it's important to be aware of the fact that we hear music relative to the bass, because it's the simplest sound, it's the slowest frequency, and it's the most fundamental note that we can stack all the other notes on top of, subconsciously speaking. Now let's apply that to chords. Let me play an A minor triad, which is a 1, 3, 5, or in other words, the first, third, fifth. Let me play an A in the bass. Let me move that bass note down one note. Because the bass now physically moved down, all the notes in the chord have relatively moved up. So this is no longer a first, third, fifth, but a 2, 4, 6. Let's move the bass down another note. The bass physically moves, so the chord relatively moves, and this is no longer a second, but a third. No longer a fourth, but a fifth. Not a sixth, but a seventh. And I can keep doing this, playing the same chord over and over again. Well, the bass note, the heaviest note, the fundamental sound is the one that moves. That's where all the energy is, so that is what we focus on. The power of this technique comes from the constant shift in meaning that the notes of the chord have. That shift generates a lot of energy, and the movements of the bass generate a lot of energy. But because the notes of the chord never actually physically move, it never feels quite resolved to me. There's a lot of energy there, there's a lot of power, but never quite resolves. Contrast that with one bass note and different chords, where I could be playing an entire chord progression that resolves, subverts. There's energy there, but as much as the chords are moving, the bass is standing still. And because the bass is so fundamental, there's this dissonance, this tension between two dominant bodies, one moving and one standing still. So, what should we write with it? So now that we're getting to know these techniques a little, it's time to start using their emotional quality to write music with. So let's start with one bass and different chords. It's vague, it's unclear, it's a little dissonant. So I could use it during an intro or a verse where I don't have to be very specific yet. I could just focus on setting an atmosphere. Or I could focus on its more dissonant qualities to add a lot of tension to a build-up or a bridge. Contrast that with the one chord and different bass technique, where, as we talked about, it feels more powerful but not quite resolved. So I might use it during every chorus to give my song an almost resolved, almost finished kind of feeling. And then during my last chorus and my last few bars, that's the only place I'm gonna resolve my chords, and it's really gonna finish the song up. It's really gonna bring everything home. So, it looks like we got ourselves a song. Let's open our song with one bass and different chords to really just set an atmosphere. Then we'll speed up the rhythm and move into a pre-chorus where we'll use its more tense qualities to get a build-up until the chorus hits. And that's where we'll use one chord with different bass notes. And the bass will go wild, but it will never feel quite resolved. Only in the last 10 seconds will we resolve the chords to really drive home that chord progression and finish our song. Now remember, what you're about to hear is my way of using these techniques because this is what they make me feel. So if you want to use them as well, don't focus on that. Focus on what they make you feel, and then use that to tell your story in music. So let's give it a listen. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. If you did and you like this technique, consider subscribing. And until next time, thanks for watching.